Okay, all good.
So I want to welcome everybody to our pop-up webinar on behalf of Stanford Public Schools and the Youth Services Bureau. We are here today to answer some of your questions as students to what is going on now in our community and across our country regarding racism, violence, how do we interact with our police, and then I know a lot of you have questions about what's going on here in your own school district. So we have a lot of questions that you guys have emailed us, and we want to give enough time to answer all of them fully. So I do anticipate a student was going to co-facilitate this webinar with myself. I'm Antonia Thompson from the Youth Services Bureau, and Nichelle will be on briefly as soon as she can check in with us, and then she will have the opportunity to introduce herself to you. So what I want to do, with no further ado, is get to who our panelists are here with you today. What we tried to do in all the questions that were emailed to Bob Cosienda and myself. Bob Cosienda runs our milk program at Stanford High School, and then he also coordinated with the other coordinators at AIT and West Hill. And as you know, this was publicized to everybody here in Stanford that had the opportunity to send us questions. So some of the questions we have today, and we got rid of some of the duplicates, and we made the most questions that were being asked, we provided to the panelists ahead of time so that they would have a little heads up and be able to fully answer the questions that you all sent in. You will notice that there is a chat box. I know you guys are all familiar with Zoom, so you get it. If you have any questions that you want to ask any of the panelists that are here today, we're going to ask that you type it into the chat box, and our assistant superintendent Olympia De La Flora, who's also on the call, will monitor that and make sure that the questions are asked to our panelists. Another couple of things is please keep your phones all on mute. If some of you really want to be heard and you want to address one of the panelists, just write your name in that chat box, so we will try to manage that and be able to unmute you and have you answer a question directly. Can't guarantee it because, again, we've got a tight schedule today, but we're going to try our best to make sure that everybody is heard. So with no further ado, in no particular order, well, actually we will have an order because we're on Zoom, is we will start with Olympia De La Flora, and then we will move to each panelist to give an introduction of themselves. So Olympia, we'll start with you. Yes, you're on mute. You're following the rules. Thumbs up.
Thanks, Antonia. Hi, I'm Olympia De La Flora. I am one of the associate superintendents for Stanford Public Schools, and I'm really just happy to be here and participate in this conversation. I know that we are going to continue to have several of these conversations over the next month, over the next year, and I really think that we really think it's important to allow our youth to have this forum, because a lot of the things that we do as a school district impact you directly, and we want to know exactly what types of things are on your minds, what questions you have for us as a school district. So this is just the beginning of several conversations, and if your question can't get answered here, we may not have all of the answers to the questions, but I think it's very important that we start this very important conversation. So thank you, Antonia.
Sorry, Karen Francis, how are you today?
I'm good.
Can you introduce yourself?
Okay. Are we also answering one of those questions too, or just introducing ourselves?
Right now, yes, you can answer the question that you had chosen during your introduction. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Okay, just want to make sure. Hi, I'm Karen Francis Lawrence. I am the Curriculum Associate for Stanford Public Schools. I do want to say that I'm having some facial issues today, but I wanted to be here because I think this conversation is really important for us to have. So please bear with me if I'm a little slur. I hope you can hear everything that I'm trying to say because I feel like I have a lot to say. The question that I chose was the first one, which is how have you personally been impacted by racism, privilege, and race-related violence? I feel like racism impacts my life every single day because it's not something that's just external that happens to you. It's also something that you internalize, unfortunately. And when you internalize it, it takes on a whole nother life. So externally, have I been affected? Yes. I've walked down the street and have had old white lady call me the N-word without even knowing who she is. I went to college, and when my roommate first saw me, she gave me a look. And after she looked at me, the first thing she said to me is, "I'm not going to stay here long." I went out with my white friends to get ice cream, and I told them, predicted that the attendant was going to serve them and ignore me. And she did. I've come to the point in my life where I'm able to shop in stores where I never thought I would be able to shop in. Where I go into these stores and people look at me as if I'm there to steal, that I don't belong there. So those are external things that happen to you, and it happens to you throughout your life. But then you internalize them. And when I internalize them, you then affect what you do. So there are cities and towns in Fairfield County, Connecticut, that I don't drive through, because I've been told since I was a kid that these towns do not like Black people. And if you get stopped, something will happen to you. My son went to school down south last year, and I had to give him a list of different things to do and not do, and how to be safe if you left the campus. And now he's learning how to drive. And I will teach him all the stuff I'm supposed to teach him: how to turn, how to signal, how to merge. But then there's a whole layer of other things I need to teach him. That's what we call driving while Black. So if he ever gets pulled over, he needs to know to keep both hands on the steering wheel at all times. He needs to make sure he calls the police officer ma'am or sir, even if he thinks what they did was wrong in pulling him over. And he needs, above all, not to go reaching for anything. When most parents fear for their kids that an accident can happen, I'm raising 3 Black boys. My fear is they won't come home one night. So that is how racism, privilege, and race-related violence affects me every single day.
Thank you, Karen. We'll now hear from Isaiah Grant.
Hey, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you guys are located. It is a pleasure to be here. Antonia, thank you. Olympia, thank you for inviting me. So everybody, I'm 25 years old. I went to AIT in Stanford, so I understand what you guys are going through. I loved it in Stanford. I was born and raised in Norwalk, Connecticut, in a single parent household where a lot of what I went through was both included racism and also socioeconomic discrimination as well. And I'll get into a little bit of what that entails, but I currently own a digital marketing agency. And one of the things that I want to let you guys know is that where you come from and what you're facing here at the moment in terms of racism and these unfortunate challenges do not stop you from actually pursuing your destiny and purpose that is called for your life. So for me, I've been able to work with different service providers, and I personally help coaches turn their businesses into online businesses so they can ultimately get more clients. But for the sake of this presentation and panel, I'll be answering the question, what can you do to continue the movement outside of social media? So as you all know, it's very important that we don't do activism in a sense of just performance based, where we're ultimately trying to fit in or trying to do what other people do in terms of posting on social media. And the way we can get around that is by simply just doing 5 simple things. Is number 1, send emails to your local representatives. There's folks on Instagram, Facebook that are actually posting already created emails, which I can send you guys a template to. And ultimately it says, hey, you're not in support of the discrimination and the racism that may have faced a person like George Floyd, and you want that police officer to be fired. So again, to recap, that step number 1 is to send an email to local representatives to let them know what you feel and what you experience so that they can proactively take measurement. Because again, the power is in the numbers and pressure leads to change. So if you're going out there and emailing folks, then we have another 1,000 students that are emailing folks. Those numbers at whole can largely impact a decision made by the government. And then number two is a lot of restaurants, small businesses have been impacted by these challenging times. So if you can, if your budget allows you to, or your family's budget, go out to restaurants and be generous, right? Give out generous tips, right? So that we can reinvest back into the local economy, specifically minority and Black-owned businesses. Number three is join protests, right? So like, I encourage you to go to ones in your local area. There's ones that are in Stanford, Norwalk, Hartford, all over Connecticut. Join those protests, take pictures, actively participate, and then tell people about your experience. And then also too, a lot of minority-owned businesses, they have events coming up. You may not be able to attend them due to school or vacation programs, etc. But make a list of them and send them to people that are in your toolbox, so that even though you can't make it, maybe somebody else can make it. And then lastly, helpful resources. There are a lot of minority-owned businesses which actually equate to $1 billion industry. And there's grants that companies like Home Depot, Lowe's, GE, that they're giving out grants to minority-owned businesses. So make a list of those and give out those resources to people that are in time of need. So just to recap, share positive experiences. Don't necessarily dwell on the negative ones, but participate in local events and share resources. That's how you can actively leave an impact.
Thank you, Isaiah. We'll now go to Officer Bill Brevard.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that, a little technical difficulty.
That's okay.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. First off, thank you, Antonia, for having me sit on this panel. I was looking forward to it. I am a 24-year Stanford police officer veteran. In that time, I've served in just about every capacity within the department, from major crimes to property crimes. I was an SRO. I also taught cultural awareness and diversity in the police academy. Right now, my current assignment is I'm one of 2 sergeants in charge of Special Victims Unit and the Youth Bureau. So I'm looking forward to giving my perspective as not only as a police officer, but as a Black police officer here in Stanford. I've had many discussions with my colleagues and others throughout the community. And one of the things I wanted to express was that, you know, I'm going to retire as a police officer, but I will always be a Black man in America. So I'm looking forward to the questions and giving you my perspective on those questions as to where I stand in my position right now. There's the question I wanted to answer is really, I wanted to give you a documentary that you can take a look at. Most of you probably have heard of it before. It's called 13th, and it's free on Netflix. And it was written by Ava DuVernay. She's an African-American film director. And the title represents the 13th Amendment, which was abolished slavery in 1865. So what this documentary does is it shines a light on the modern day systemic racism that you see today. And it really gives a history of it. I found that documentary to be very informative, and it really opens your eyes to what was going on from the end of slavery all the way up until now. So if you haven't seen it, I really implore you to see it. Another movie that I just saw recently, which also speaks to what we're talking about in this day and age, is called Just Mercy. It's free on YouTube all month. They're offering it free. And it stars Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. And it takes place in Alabama back in the mid-'80s. And it's about a young man who was falsely accused of committing a murder. So it takes you through what happens to him. And when you watch these 2 movies, just think about everything we're going to talk about today, everything that's going on in our society today. And I just like to say, as much as things change, they stay the same. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Officer Brevard. And just before we go to our Dr. Tishiana Amar, and I'm apologizing if I say your name wrong, as long as I've known you. I just want to point out in our chat box, some of our panelists are answering these questions, and they also did too. So they wrote a response. So in your chat, you will see access to those 2 documents from those 2 panelists. And then we will provide links for what Officer Brevard just talked about as far as Netflix and the Just Mercy and the 13th. So please look in that chat box for some further information that we're going to share. And now we will come to our panelist here, Dr. Tishiana Amar. Welcome, Tishiana.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm, as Antonia said, I am Dr. Tishiana Arma. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a physician and psychiatrist. I work at the Community Health Center Incorporated. I am the medical director for behavioral health, as well as vice president for behavioral health there. I'm also an assistant clinical professor at Yale University in the Department of Psychiatry, where I did my residency. And when I'm not doing all of those things, I'm actually not born and raised in Stanford. I'm from the Bronx. But working with our population has been really important to me. And so outside of work, I do a good deal of going to churches and other community organizations to really talk about mental health and increase awareness. So I answered 2 questions, and one of them I assume will be in that second Google document that I went ahead and answered. And we actually shared one of those recommendations in terms of movies or documentaries, which is 13th. But I have a couple others in there. But I wanted to answer the question that one of our other panelists answered, which was, how have you personally been impacted by racism, privilege, and or race-related violence? So, really the impacts on me personally begin while in the womb, but that story would really take too long to tell. But in one of my earliest memories, early on in youth, I can recall being made fun of in public for being Black. I remember very distinctly, it was 4th of July celebration in New York City at a park, and I was in a public restroom with my older stepsister who could pass for white. And she had taken me in there to wash my hands before having a meal. And a little white girl and her mother entered before we left and pointed at me and said in the sweetest little voice, "Mommy, did someone put her in the oven too long?" And I remember feeling so hurt and so much shame at that time. Now that is until my mother heard about it and pointed out how concerning it really was that the child thought being in an oven for any amount of time was normal. And this real, sadness ended up turning into laughter, and was really a good example of how my mother impacted my self-esteem through combating all the messages that I faced outside of our household, which allowed me not to be defined by others negatively, because of my race. She had a similar approach to racial profiling in stores, a zero tolerance, refusing to let me spend a penny in a place where I got such treatment. And a more recent demonstration that really relates to what we're talking about today is how race-related violence has a far-reaching and unique impact on Black people, even when they're not experiencing it, directly. So I'm a psychiatrist, right? So day in and day out, I treat patients for every emotional issue under the sun. But depression and anxiety are very common issues I treat. Actually a month from now, July 13th, Sandra Bland had lost her life 5 years ago. And I happened to be writing an article called The Next Black America, Opportunities Amidst Challenges at that same time. And it was really exploring the issues of police violence towards Black people and dehumanization, among other things. So I learned almost immediately about her demise, and it played over and over again in my own head. And I was adding her case to my article, picturing her, imagining how I myself would have reacted, and recalling for myself being pulled over on multiple occasions. So I began to find myself, as I pondered this over and over, beginning to feel anxiety when I drove on the road. You know, I had been driving for many years. I treat anxiety, but yet I found my heart racing, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ear, you know, gripping my steering wheel with extreme tension in my neck, leading to pain, shortness of breath, and sweating profusely, doing something as mundane as driving myself into work each day. There were many times when I was sure I heard the faint sounds of sirens in the background, when I was pretty certain really that there was no police around. I would suddenly drive around like a snail, at a snail's pace, while vehicles were zipping past me as I tried to remember how to breathe. Having to take my own advice, there was even one occasion when I needed to pull over and collect myself with some deep breathing and return on my way to work. And it took several months after learning about Sandra Bland's case for me to drive peacefully without the level of anxiety, when really there was no visible threat. As a Black woman, both before and after that, seeing a black and white vehicle, or one of those old painted police vehicles that are so distinctive in their shape, can instill fear in me that was, you know, really is not unfounded. But as a psychiatrist, I can say both from treating my patients and from personal experience that there is healing from this. And it's possible with knowledge, with support, and practice. I had to, as I teach my patients, A, step away from the news a bit, B, do protective things for my mind and body after reading this kind of news, like exercise. C, I had to schedule my exposures much more carefully and not inundate myself with this negativity and tragedy and not wake to it or go to sleep to it. And I needed to write or go out and combat some of the harms done by the pressure and the stress on me. As a Black woman, going out, talking about the strategies to combat the depression and anxiety that our systemic racism that we are subjected to each day can cause. And I needed to go out for myself and encourage more Black folks to get help where it was needed. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion and answering your questions, especially related to mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Armar. That was awesome. Awesome to all of our panelists. We have a lot of knowledge here. So I'm excited, and we're just going to get right into it. And to the kids that have joined the call, there are a number of questions that were sent in by students to ask our panelists here today that we put together. And I'm going to just go in order and ask questions as they've been written to us. If you have questions that you want to be asked to the panel, we're going to try to save some time for the end of this to answer your questions. So please put them in the chat box. You can type out your questions. Also go there to see some of the information that the panelists are talking about as far as their recommendations for materials to get yourself up to speed about what has been going on in our country and in history. So please visit the chat box to get more information. So we're going to get right into this. And what I'll say to my panelists is just be mindful that I know you have a lot to share and we want to hear it, but I am going to keep you on a time limit because we have a lot to get through. So if you see the peace sign, but it really is 2 minutes and wrap it up, I'm saying it in a very gentle, kind way to say, let's go, okay? So we're going to start, and we'll keep ourselves on mute just if I just call out your name to the specific question. So the first question is going to go out to Officer Brevard. How do you justify or stand for a justice system that seems to be inherently racist?
First off, I would say that as a Black man in America and a police officer, there is no justification. You can't justify it, and you don't stand for it. A justice system that seems to be inherently racist. There is no other explanation. I mean, I have to be straightforward and to the point. That's just it. There is no justification. You don't stand for it. I don't stand for it. It goes against everything I believe and who I am. not only as a police officer, but as a Black man in America. So there is no justification.
Thank you. To Dr. Ahmad, in this time of division in the country, especially with recent protests, how can I keep myself and others informed and educated without triggering anxiety? You're on mute.
Thank you. So yeah, so I sort of started to answer that question a little bit, just in that, you know, one of the things that I teach all of my patients is, you know, scheduling the time to get informed about things. So for instance, if it's important that you know what's happening in the world, right? And so you should be, you know, looking at that news, looking at the social media that is going to inform you. But I recommend that, since it can be so triggering right now, that you have it placed in your day that's not like the first thing that you do in the morning, and it's not the last thing that you do before you go to bed. The other thing is that if you can do something that will allow you to sort of release and let go, whatever it is for you. For different people, it's different, right? So for somebody, it's to go exercise, someone else is to go dance, listen to music, write, whatever it is that you usually do to help you to cope. And I can give some, you know, feel free to ask me. I can give tons of different examples of ways that one could cope if they don't already have strategies. But if you have a strategy, place that right after you're doing that. And one thing that I strongly recommend, though, is sort of writing it out, because you can sort of put those feelings all on paper. Hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. The next question is to Isaiah. How can I increase my activism efforts to shed light on racism to make a significant impact without it seeming like performance activism? I find myself struggling with how to show my support on social media in an impartial way, rather than just posting things on my stories.
Yeah, it's a very touchy question here. So number one, it's all about intent. So if the intent is to go and post on social media for recognition, you're already at a fault because you're not doing it with the right intent to help people get through these challenging times. So number one, realize that everything you're seeing is more than likely going to be negative. You're seeing people getting burnt, the rioting, people getting shot, dead bodies, unfortunately, on Instagram, Facebook, but also acknowledge the positive, right? So we talked about this a few minutes ago, is acknowledge Black-owned businesses, support local restaurants, discuss and join local protests, and archive and document the success behind those protests. And then do your research for upcoming events in the local area. If you can't make it, try to refer other people to them, whether it's like helpful groups, whether it's, again, protests or things of that nature. And lastly, look for resources that you can send to people who may be struggling with the issue. So grants, scholarships, loans are all important, especially with Black-owned businesses, because we're literally a billion-dollar industry that if we dedicated all of our time, our energy, and money for one day alone, we can shift the economy drastically. So if we just invested one day to really help Black-owned businesses, we can do that drastically, because it all boils down to the power in the numbers, that we can make a difference. We can prevent racism by really focusing on Black-owned economy here as well. So.
Awesome, thank you, Isaiah. Karen, we need to embrace what Martin Luther King referred to as the fierce urgency of now. Therefore, what programs or activities will the school district have in place to address racism, privilege, and violence when we return to school in September? Please be specific.
Okay, first I want to address the idea of activities. I love activities. They draw attention to things, but activities are flashy. They're usually one and done, and it's usually nothing of substance done afterwards. So I do hope that each school in the fall come up with an activity, a unifying activity that helps students to start setting the stage and understanding where they stand on this issue. But it's not going to be enough. It's like, for example, we have all these companies now who are putting up these signs saying Black Lives Matter, but none of them have put any substance behind what they're doing. Amazon has not gone out and showcased any Black-owned companies on their website to say these companies are Black-owned and we're going to support them specifically. So for now, it's just showboating. What Stanford is trying to do is to give substance to that. And that takes a little bit more time. So that's not going to be a quick fix. And they're doing it through a program called restorative justice. And what restorative justice is meant to do is meant to change, long-term change of climate and culture. Climate being how people feel, being if I walk into that building, how do I feel about it? And culture being what do people say and think about that place when they walk into it. So restorative justice is meant to help change the climate and the culture of the place of these buildings and making it more open to all students from all different walks of life. One of the major things that restorative justice has to it, or components, is mediation. And I was lucky enough when I was a Stanford High student 25 years ago to be part of a mediation program that they did. And the woman who ran it, Dottie DeLoe, she looked for kids like myself who were on the fringe of society. She actually found me in ISS on a week's worth of in-school detention for cursing out my vice principal. And she said, come here. And she took me in. And she gave me skills that showed me how to talk instead of yell, and how to listen instead of shut people out, being defensive. Those skills changed my understanding of the climate and culture at Stanford High. Before, I believed I didn't matter. I believed no one cared. After that, I realized someone was there to listen to me and someone was there to care about me. I believe that's what restorative justice does for students. And Stanford is in the process, and they have been for the past 2 or 3 years, of building that program up school by school so that every kid would feel like I did when I was in Stanford High, that I mattered and there was at least one person who's there to listen to me and believe in me. And that's the hope, and that's what we want to continue to do in Stanford Public Schools.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. And a follow-up to that, Dr. Ahmad, what do schools need to do to prepare for students' mental health issues that have been triggered by racism, violence, and privilege? And can you be specific?
Absolutely, thank you. So I think that it's always, everything is sort of multifaceted in dealing with all of this, but I'll talk about just really quickly sort of a three-pronged approach. One is that they definitely need to make mental health professionals available to talk about how all of this is really impacting them, and partner up with others, such as community organizations, programs, like things we're hearing about, and health and mental health organizations, because not only does it impact you mentally, but that mental impact also impacts you in terms of your physical health as well. So I think that's important to note. The other thing is really just decreasing the daily triggers in schools alone. You know, sort of throwing aside the notion that color blindness really exists or that it's helpful in the approach to education and treatment of students as well. So instead of a strong focus on that, instead a strong focus on celebrating multiculturalism, reviewing the books that you have and you're exposing children to so that it has a really positive impact on self-esteem, and making available, more representations of themselves in not only books and in curricula, but the staff and the teachers that they're working with. And really sort of combating the status quo that undervalues the contributions of Black America, separating it and designating it to 1 month of the year or a couple of books, as well as, just not focusing just on the same leaders that are represented in Black history, which sort of implies that there's a paucity, there are few to choose from. And really doing the research and making these folks known, getting students engaged in finding this history out themselves is empowering and really excellent for mental health, as studies have shown us. Getting teachers and all the staff educated about the problems that exist is another, and then recognizing that it's not just the explicit violence, but the microaggressions experience and the sense of unfairness that children really experience daily. And finally, also the criminalization of children really needs to be addressed. There's really strong evidence that shows there's a difference in the level of punishment for the same infractions for children as young as preschoolers. And more recently, a study from Yale showed that teachers, when asked to look for bad behavior, and which there wasn't really going to be any bad behavior in these instances, the only thing they were going to change was the race of the children, what they found was that those teachers' eyes immediately went to the Black male students first. So all of these, you know, it's, again, like I said, multifaceted approach at dealing with that.
Wonderful, thank you. And so as I go on to this round with the last two questions for Officer Brevard and Isaiah, I know my co-facilitator is out there in cyber world. If Naisha can come up on our screen, she's gonna start asking questions that have been written to our chat box. So once we finish this, Naisha will be asking some of the questions that are being asked today. So now I will jump over to Officer Brevard and ask, the question is, what reform should be taken in the police department to decrease police violence and forceful action against people of color? Each one of them, they're all asking to be very specific. So if you can. You gotta unmute. I love that you guys are yeah, you can unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
I mean, that question is a very good question. And as you all know, over the last week, if you don't know, there's been a lot of reform on the national level, the state level, and the local level. And I'll start with the national level, and then that way you can see how it's trickling down to the local level. On the national level, just last week, Congress proposed a reform bill. The bill includes ban on chokeholds, the creation of a national police misconduct registry. So what that does is, if an officer does something wrong within his department and he's disciplined for it, and he decides to retire and he goes to another department, he'll be on a registry showing that he's been disciplined at that other department, and therefore he'll be unable to achieve employment somewhere else. So, you know, that next department is not getting an officer who already has those bad habits. Also, states and localities to make racial bias training. It will also hold officers accountable in their duty to intervene. And I really like that one. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And this is something that was shocking to me. The bill has an anti-lynching component to it, which I thought lynching was already possibly a federal crime, but it really wasn't. So I was very shocked to hear that. There's other stuff in the national reform bill, but I'm going to move down to the state level. The state bans chokeholds. They have a duty to intervene. It also bans shooting at motor vehicles. I'm going to get back to duty to intervene, which I think is one of the most important ones, as you saw in the George Floyd case. The duty to intervene is, if I'm an officer at the scene, even though I'm not physically having the altercation, but I see my fellow officer doing something wrong, I have to intervene. I must intervene. I must do something to stop that officer. I can't just stand there with my hands in my pocket like nothing's happening. So that's a very important one. The state also added to that the fact that if I do intervene and I bring Officer A up on, on a complaint charge, there cannot be any retaliation against me. So that's a very important component, and that holds me even that much more accountable for that other officer's actions. So I think those are two important things. But I'm going to get into what we're doing here in Stanford locally, because we've done a lot. Most of the things that national and the state have started and put into reform, we're doing already. But as you know, we can always do better. So right now, what we've done in Stanford is we've hired an outside consultant to look at all of our policies and procedures and to update the language and revise our policies and procedures, in particular when it comes to use of force issues. So we're in the process of doing that right now. We also added an important component to our current curriculum for new officers, and that's an education on police and community relations. This is going to be unique because this class will be given officers. So those we did last week. We had a session last week. And why that's is because as a minority officer, you're able to give your perspective and your view on the community you're going to serve. You know, I can give my experiences as to, you know, how it impacted my life in my community, and give those other officers a better understanding of the community that they're getting ready to serve. So that to me is definitely an important thing that we've done. We're in the process also of scheduling officers to take the updated current implicit bias training course. Hopefully we have everyone scheduled for that by July. So that's what we're aiming for that right now. Now, behind the scenes, what we've done, and this is more important and very important than things that, you know, you really don't see or it's not written down. We've met with multiple community leaders that include, you know, faith-based organizations, churches, clergy, the NAACP, Building One Communities. Building One Communities services the Hispanic population and also the Haitian community as well, and other organizations throughout the city. So we've started conversations with those individuals and organizations so that we can improve and talk about the best ways to improve our relationship with the community. We also, you know, as you know, we've had several protests and rallies. I've been at pretty much every single one of them. What we try to do is, at the protests and rallies, we do speak to the organizers, but the chief has taken it a step further, and I have a meeting today, actually. We meet with those organizers after the fact, because we know they're gonna have the rallies, protest, but you know what? The important work has to be done when the rallies have stopped and the protests have stopped. So we have such a meeting today, this afternoon. So we're going to continue that work. And, you know, I think it's important that we keep the dialogue open, and we're just going to continue to you know, change the way we do things. So.
Thank you so much for that update. That was very helpful to me to hear that information. I know Isaiah Grant's going to have to jump off in a little bit, so I want to go to you, Isaiah, to give you one more question before we go to Naisha to do our real-time questions. And so the question to you is, how has social media changed people's perspectives of police, in your opinion? Or have they?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely. So I would say that it's changed the police to be more of a negative persona, and also putting labels on folks where labels really, they describe who a person is, but doesn't define who they are. And unfortunately, police officer bill, a lot of people, of course, have labeled police officers as negative, as terrorist groups, because of what has gone on and has been documented on social media. The best way to think about it is to come from a level of empathy, and also with compassion, is that not everybody is the same. Bill, I don't know you personally, but I can imagine from the things that you've said, you're an incredible person. So it's unfair to actually label a person by somebody else's misbehavior. So first step I would recommend to everybody on the line is come from a stage of empathy, understand that maybe that person made the best decision they could at the time, but also look at the factual information that if somebody was harmed due to racism, that we should stand up. And this brings me to my second point, is that you can be proactive by simply signing petitions. Like, for example, with George Floyd, there was an online petition to get 1 million people to sign for the people to actually get arrested who killed him, and over 18 million people have signed it. So it goes back to the idea that the power is in the numbers, that your act of kindness, your act of belief, your act of courage to just sign something can put us back on the map. But at the same time, we can't label people and say that everybody is a bad cop, right? Like, we have people like Bill who are going out there every single day, like fighting for us, protecting us, and putting their life at harm. So it's important to see both perspectives. But at the moment, unfortunately, police are labeled as the bad guy, and that's not what we want here. So.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely correct. I'm 110% behind that. So I want to have Naisha introduce herself, because she did a phenomenal job in helping put this together, getting all these questions from her peers. So I know she had a little glitch today and she was a little nerve-wracked by it, but don't worry about it. We appreciate you, and you've done a phenomenal job. We have over 43 people on this call because of the work you and your peers have done. So as the adults, we guys give you all a big clap up for stepping up and creating this platform. So Naisha, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to the group, and then you can start our questions from the chat box.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we.
Okay. Hi, my name is Naisha Vortex, and I'm a junior at Stanford High School. I'm a member of the Mayor's Youth Leadership Council, and I do a lot of activism work. And so this panel is really important to me because I am also a member of the Black community. And so I just wanted to thank Stanford Public Schools and also all of the attendees and participants for joining today. And back to Antonia, I just wanted to tell you that I am unable to see the chat box questions.
That would be a problem. Okay, that's okay.
Yes.
Let's see. I know I have Olympia on the call that's helping me. She may be able to see some of them. So I will let Olympia just have a couple of moments to go through all of those areas there. And I'll keep with our printed questions. And then Olympia, when you're ready to ask a few, you can just maybe unmute yourself or your camera. I know she's giving me a thumbs up, although I don't see her. So let me ask a question to Karen. If students want to coordinate a campaign or program a Black Lives Matter campaign, how will the school help them?
To be specific, every school has like a chain of command. Usually you have a counselor or an advisor, AP, in some cases, assistant principal, who can work with them in order to put together some kind of a campaign that they would want. Once they have that plan put together, I don't believe there's anything that would stand in their way for having that organized event occur. You guys have, this generation has George Floyd. My generation had Rodney King. And when I was in high school, 1992, Rodney King was beaten, for those of you who may not know, was probably the first taped incidents in modern history. My group was called MSU, Stanford High Program, I'm not sure they still have it. Minority Student Union. We changed the name to Multicultural Student Union because there were way too many of us there, so we call minorities. And what we did was we put together with our advisor, Gloria Blue, and with a teacher, Mr. Moriarty, a program which was a week of conversations where we wanted people from the community as well as people from school to talk about what the issues were. And we worked that out with our advisors and then went to the principal and asked permission. And all we needed was a space and teachers being allowed kids time to leave class. And we were able to do that with very little resistance because everyone knew how important the situation and topic was. So I think with everyone working together, administration, students, advisors, you guys can easily put something together for your school and beyond in the fall if that's something you'd like to do. Just find out who is the best advisor to help you in the building.
Thanks, Karen. So there is a question in the chat. It was actually addressed to Karen, but actually I think anyone could answer. Karen did make a comment in the chat. The question is, in regards to the youth and the education system, how do you convince students who are already subjected to racial stereotypes that they can actually succeed in life.
And I actually would like to go deeper with that answer because I was quickly doing chat and I put down, I hope to be a model for those kids, but I didn't explain what I meant by that. I'm a first generation immigrant, came from the Caribbean islands, and I started school here when I was in kindergarten. And think back a little. Dr. Russo has this thing where this year our theme has been why Stanford? And when she says that, why Stanford? Why are you here? Everyone usually says something really cute about, oh, Stanford, I really like being here. My why Stanford is not cute. My why Stanford is, I didn't accidentally become a teacher. I became a teacher because there were so many things done badly in my education that I needed to be here to be a role model for other kids. When I was younger, I had an accent. And so my teachers thought in kindergarten, first grade, they had to nicely take the accent out of me, which wasn't nice at all. I changed elementary schools twice in Stanford, and both times ended up in the lowest group possible. In one of them, I actually ended up in special education. When I was in high school, like I said before, I didn't say actually, I was very outspoken in my social studies classes because I knew more about certain topics than my teachers did. And they were not very happy about that. So I became a teacher because I had one teacher in high school that really did a lot for me. But I became a social studies teacher because I wanted to give back to my community and hope to do things for my community that the other teachers around me had not done. So that's why Stanford. And I hope that better answers the question that the student had. You just have to rise above it, and you have to keep realizing that you are worth more than those people are saying you are.
Could I also just add to that, just to say that, I don't know that there's much of any, at least African-American child or student that I know who hasn't been subjected to racial stereotypes. Like this is very commonplace. And so one of the things that can help one to combat that is to have the opportunity and do the work to educate oneself. If there are any, I don't know if there are any parents on the line as well, but as students, you can read about all of the wonders of being who you are. And that is largely what really helped me to say, I don't care if somebody says, no, I can't do this. When my college and career counselor said, oh, are you sure you want to apply to these places? I think you don't want to you're a big fish in a small pond here. You're going to go and be a real small fish in a big pond over there. Being able to say, well, you know what? I'm not going to let that define me. I'm not going to let this person define me, because that is what he says to all people who look like me, So that is where that's where you have to do that piece of work if no one else has been helping you to do that work already.
Okay, thanks so much. Next question is really for Officer or Sergeant Brevard. And the question actually states, do you truly believe that there is inherent racism in the US justice system? And if so, to what degree does this affect their decisions and actions? And I think maybe this might be an opportunity for you, Sergeant Brevard, to talk a little bit about what implicit bias is, and how that may impact decisions that are made, and what the outcome of, maybe you mentioned the police officers will be going through implicit bias training. For some of our students that are on the line, if you could kind of just explain what implicit bias is and then what the outcome of that training would be for people once they complete it.
So go ahead, Officer Brevard. We're going to we have technical difficulty, but we're going to see if this works.
Okay, can you hear me?
Can people hear Officer Brevard? Perfect, there you go.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, did you hear the question?
No, I did not.
Oh, I'm sorry. Olympia, could you answer the question again?
Yes, let me switch back to the chat real quick. Okay, so the actual question is, do you believe that there is inherent racism in the US justice system? And if so, to what degree does this affect their decisions and actions? And then I was kind of adding on to that, maybe for some of the students on the call, if you could explain what implicit bias is, and also what the outcome of the training that police officers, even teachers and, you know, other people go through. What is the outcome that we hope to get once we learn about our own implicit biases? Because I think this question is really asking about that in that way.
Okay, can you repeat the first part? I'll start break it up and kind of answer it that way.
Yeah. Do you believe that there is inherent racism in the US justice system? And if so, to what degree does this affect their actions and decisions? Uh-oh, can't hear him now.
I recommended 13th. That actually, when you see that documentary, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. I see some of you shaking your heads, you probably saw it already. But yes, I do believe it. And what happens is when you have systemic racism like that, it not only infiltrates the police department, but all the laws that are made. I went to a voting registration rally this weekend, and when you vote and you pick your leaders, those are the ones that are making decisions, whether it be whatever those decisions are, especially in law enforcement. Those are the ones who are making laws. As you see now, you know, some of our leaders are putting forth reform right now. So those decisions and things are the way they are. It's happened over the length of many, many, many years and times. So yes, I do believe that there's racism in law enforcement and in the justice system. We're moving towards fixing that, or trying to fix it, trying to reform some things within the system. But it is a slow process, unfortunately, slower than any of us would like to, you know, we would like it to move forward faster. But yes, my answer to that is yes. And what was the other one? The other question?
I just thought it would be nice for some of the students just to hear about what implicit bias is. You mentioned the training.
Say that again.
If you could elaborate on what implicit bias is for some of the students on the call.
Okay. Let's see. What's the best way I could say implicit bias? And maybe you guys can help me out too.
Yes, I was going to say, maybe Dr. Amar can help us.
Yeah. Yes, no problem. So yeah, so implicit bias really refers to sort of the attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions and decisions in an unconscious manner. So one really fun thing that you can do, I don't know how fun it would necessarily be, but I mean, I've done it myself. Harvard implicit assumptions test is, if you just put that into Google, you will find your own implicit assumptions test that you can do yourself. And it sort of goes through really quickly and like your immediate responses about what something is that you're seeing is. And it sort of hits to what's happening sort of at an unconscious level around how you view your world. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, society and what we have. Great, thank you. Someone just put it into the chat. I would recommend actually doing it. For me, it was very affirming because I got a lot of ethnocentric and like cultural positive images growing up. So I was really curious to find out what was the underlayer for me, and really profoundly. So you might find it very instructive.
So I don't know, Olympia, if we have a couple more there, or is Naisha have some questions also?
I
don't-
still cannot see questions from the chat box.
Yeah, there are no more questions in the chat, Antonio. We've answered them.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, Naisha, do you have some other the questions that were emailed in, or do you want us to keep going from those?
Could you tell me where we left off with, like, number-wise for the questions that were listed?
We're probably at number 4.
Okay. So I'll ask number 4 to Officer Brevard. What steps are being taken right now to make sure this never happens again? Are you informing the officers what to do if another one of their own officers does this? And who are we as citizens supposed to call if we see police brutality in front of us?
Officer
Should
Brevard? Okay, sorry. Can you start from the beginning?
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Naisha, can you mute your phone?
Are we all set?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I don't know if you heard some of the changes that we've done within the police department itself. Did you hear that earlier?
Can everyone hear Officer Brevard? Give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the second part of that question, are you informing officers what to do if another one of their officers does this? So that's part of the reform from a national, state, and local level, is that officers are being held accountable. It's no longer okay for me to stand by and watch another officer use excessive force on someone and not say anything. Personally, I've had many conversations over the last several weeks with fellow officers, white officers, black officers, Hispanic officers, and those conversations, what I found, were very powerful. So, you know, they were for the first time really able to see what my perspective was on everything, especially being a black male in America. We had open dialogue. We listened to one another as well, and I think that's a major thing that we have to continue to do is listen and not be afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations. And that's what we've been having. We've been having uncomfortable conversations about race and race relations. So you have to continue to have that dialogue because it's very important. Dialogue's great, protesting's great, but the actions, you have to put some actions behind that dialogue. A part of that question is, what can you do to make sure it never happens again? I'd give my right arm to wish it never happens again. You know what I mean? But I'm not confident right now to say that it won't happen again, unfortunately. It saddens me to say that, but I'm also being realistic. We have a long way to go. I mean, we're starting in the right direction right now. We have a long way to go.
Aisha, you have your next question?
Yes. So for Miss Francis, sorry, if students want to coordinate a campaign or program for Black Lives Matter, how will the schools help them?
I answered that one already. Sorry.
Oh, my apologies.
No,
Okay.
Antonio went out of order.
Okay.
Number 3.
I'll take
Okay.
another one.
So for Isaiah, how has social media changed people's perspective of the police?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Naisha. I did go out of
Okay.
I did go out of order. Number 3 is where we are with number 3 is where we are with social media.
Okay. So number 3, what are effective methods of communication we can use to change the minds of Americans with racist and discriminatory mentalities?
Right. So the honest truth is, as students, it's not your job to actually train other people not to be racist. I do want to frame it that way, just starting off. But number two, in the unfortunate world that we live in, some of the things that you can take to safeguard yourself, protect others, and maybe educate some of the folks around you is number one, ensure you know how to have conversations and protect yourself when you have interactions with police. So knowing your rights is a great first step. Number two is always being respectful, treating people as you would do yourself, right? And not getting, I don't want to say frantic, but when in a position where you're confronted with the police, just have a human element to everything. Don't jump to conclusions, ask questions, remain calm, and know your rights. Number two is we live in a digital world, so record everything. So if you feel that your safety isn't being protected by those that are potentially supposed to be protecting you and potentially you're being harmed, record everything as you see on social media. And then number three, it goes back to what I said earlier about being empathetic and compassionate, realizing that we can't label police officers as everyone's a bad apple, but we also do have to understand that they're doing their job and attempting to protect us from things that could be potentially harmful. So understanding their perspective and your understanding of racism, you got to come from that understanding to really make the best sound decision in a time of that could be detrimental. So that's really my response to that one here. But everyone, I do have to jump off for my next session here. Do apologize for jumping off early, but I'll be giving out my email and contact information here and responding to the answers via Google Drive here. So thank you. Cool.
Thank you, Isaiah. We appreciate all your input, and thanks for being with us today. We definitely will take you up on getting back in touch with you to keep answering some of these questions. So have a great day. I also know Officer Brevard, Sergeant
Yes.
Brevard, do you have a couple of more minutes to stick with us? I know we're going a little over time, and I appreciate, we are very mindful of everyone's time.
I do have a meeting. I could answer another question, and then I will have to, unfortunately, leave for my next meeting.
Okay, so I'll ask this last question very quickly. Okay, would the Stanford Police Department be willing to take money from its budget and give it to programs for children and teens?
Say that again?
Will the Stanford Police Department be willing to take money from its budget and give it to programs for children and teens?
I don't know. That's a simple answer. I do not know. That would have to be something that would be discussed. We'd have to have that discussion, with the chief. That's a question that I would not be able to answer right now.
That's a good question.
Okay.
It is a good question. But unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you on that one. Do you have another question before I leave?
A slight follow-up to that question. Do you have any possible ideas that could maybe allow the police station to get involved more with students in a more positive way than what the media might portray or give an idea about it on?
Oh, absolutely. We're actually doing something. I supervise our community outreach program within the police department. So, we go out into the community, we give talks and everything, but out of that program, we started a boys leadership group, which we mentor young males that are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And the purpose of that is we want to teach them leadership and how to serve their community. One of the things we stress is to be a great leader, you have to know how to serve and be a great server. So we teach them and we interact with them during the school year. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, we had to cut the year short. But the program's been going since 2015, and it's been very successful. So that's one of the things that we're doing within the police department.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you for having me. And you know, this was a great discussion. I'm sorry I have to leave, but if anyone needs to get in touch with me, just reach out to Antonia. She can give you my information. I'm always available.
Yes.
And I want to thank you all again.
Thank you. And I did put my email information for next steps to continue the conversation. So those of you that are on the call and want to get information of next steps or different platforms that will be available for you to participate, please email us your contact information. So Olympia, do we still have a little more time to take a couple of more questions?
There's one I sent to you, Antonia. It was actually for Sergeant Brevard, but I think you probably can answer this one. The question is, where can students go to find information about their rights as a citizen when confronted by police and stopped without provocation?
That's a great question. And I wish I will tell you of some resources. I wish I could drop them in the links in there, but you definitely can reach out to legal aid. There are legal aid offices in all communities and neighborhoods that deal with the legal rights of either housing, anything outside of criminal activity. They will help families navigate the legal system. So definitely legal aid. And they also have programs that go into the community and educate people on their rights. Our program with the Restorative Justice Project does street law, which is a workshop that goes in and tells juveniles about their rights in the community, how to interact with police. We talk about Miranda rights and other things that deal specifically with the juvenile justice system and going into custody. So there's also the NAACP that you can also reach out to get information from that organization. I can't talk to the different programs that they have right now, but I know nationally, if you go to the national website for the NAACP, even the ACLU, you can download pamphlets that will give you information about the law, how to interact with police, how to advocate or figure out where you can get that information. So if you can't access those links or I'm talking too fast, definitely send me an email and I'll be sure to get you in touch with the different organizations. And then also I can talk to you a little bit about how we interact in the police and what your rights are as kids. Part of my history, and I don't think I had mentioned it before, is I am an attorney. I was a public defender for 10 years, specifically representing juveniles. So I can talk about it for days. So that is a great question. And the best thing you can do for yourself is to be informed. Not make, when we talk about the legal system, there are laws that we have to follow, just as the police have laws that they have to follow. So you can't take it into your own hands. And I know a lot of us will go by antidotes, by like what my cousin did, what my friend did, but the law is the law and you should know exactly what it is before you step out of it. So that's how I would ask that. But that's a fantastic question. So definitely know your rights and let's get you that information. So I see that we have Dr. Arma and Ms. Francis still on the call. So Naisha, can we ask them maybe our last two questions before we wrap up for today?
Yes, I actually have one question for Ms. Francis. Would the Stanford Public Schools be willing to replace armed officers with more social workers?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I don't know. I mean, I really know we're in a very bad budget season right now. That's as best as I can say. Would I rather see more? Personally, not talking from Stanford Public School, but for myself, yes, I would rather see more social workers. But I have no control over that part of our system at all. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question. So hopefully that could be discussions that could happen with the Board of Education and Dr. Lucero, and maybe something you guys can work towards if that is something you really want to see.
I see one question in our Q&A, and I think Dr. Ahmad, maybe you could give your opinion on this, because one of the questions that was going to go to you was, how do you feel about armed officers in schools? And I guess the effect that would have on children. But a question that's in the Q&A is applies to all panelists. If it is clear that we really need police reform, is defunding the police counterintuitive to reform, or do you feel it is necessary? Doctor,
Yeah,
after that, because there's a lot of layers.
That's a pretty. I think it's sort of a loaded question. It's pretty. There's two totally different sides of that argument. On the one hand, people are really frustrated with what the police, what they look like right now and what it sort of signifies in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it's very likely that, this is really just my opinion, that defunding is not really going to answer the problem. We still have a need for sort of law enforcement, but we need it to be culturally sensitive. We need it to be representative of the people that they are protecting and serving, and actually, fully doing that job. If you want me to veer a little bit into just the impact of what it is like to have armed officers in schools, there is evidence that would, increase things like anxiety and have kids feel like school is more like walking into a war zone instead of into a place of learning. So there are concerns around having, sort of armed officers in schools. And one of the big concerns is the fact that it seems to be disparate. So in schools that are predominantly white, you're not seeing so much of that. And in schools that are predominantly Black and brown, you are seeing more armed officers. So it's more about, is there equity in this? And what's the sense of it? And what are the studies to show whether or not does it decrease crime? And is it having an impact on children's learning? Is it having an impact on their mental health? There was recently a New York Times article talking about it, and sort of anecdotal, but what I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a physician, we base things on evidence. So we like to look at, what do the studies show us? But I gave my own little personal testimony, right, about getting anxiety just seeing police. So you can imagine for folks who don't see police as being someone to serve them, to protect them, having a very different experience of that. And so even in the same school with Black and white children, having a different experience of what it means to have armed officers in their schools.
Thank you for that response. And so on behalf of myself and Aisha, I just want to say thank you for everyone who participated. Thank you to our panelists. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to give this back over to Olympia De La Flora to close us out, but we greatly appreciate all of the kids that sent in their questions. We could sit here all day, and we hope to keep this conversation going, so I invite everyone to come back, and I appreciate Stanford Public Schools creating this platform. So I'll hand it over you to Olympia to give our closing remarks.
Thank you, Antonia, and I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists and all of our attendees, and I just want to reiterate what Antonia said. If things come up and you have questions that come up after this webinar, we don't want you to not ask the question. So please use the email address in the chat box. You also can feel free to reach out to me or to my office. We have an Office of Family and Community Engagement that is in my department. And this is the work that we do. We work closely with the Mayor's Youth Bureau. So I encourage you to continue to ask questions, continue to have the conversations, continue to seek help from the adults that you have in your community, whether it be a teacher, whether it be someone in a faith-based organization, someone at Boys and Girls Club, or someone that you trust to help you navigate through these topics, because they're not easy topics, not even for the adults. So just try to think about what resources you do have and try to get some understanding to that. So with that being said, we want to thank everyone for taking time out. Today is officially the last day of school, so I hope everyone has a safe summer. And like I said, please reach out to the email address, the restorative justice at stanfordct.gov, or feel free to contact the Office of Family and Community Engagement with Stanford Public Schools. And if there are other topics that you as students want to see us do webinars or pull some people in from the community to discuss, please share those too, because we want to, especially since we're in a virtual learning format, we want to make sure that we are still connecting with students in this way. So
Can I say one thing?
Have a good afternoon and a good week.
Thank you again.